My name's Keir Menzies. I'm just a guy with a face who's interested in faces. My interest stems from something that happened to my face. I can talk about what that not just looks like, but also feels like from inside a face. So I've always kind of been interested in drawing, caricatures, also parody, and hello world. I kind of have a good sense of where tongues have to be to make certain sounds, how faces are positioned, how individuals' occlusion, and to a certain extent facial structure, affects how they talk. Something I've always been interested in. And so I noticed on animations early on that all of the bad guys, Dick Dastardly, Doofenshmirtz, Gargamel, the witch from Snow White, they all have retruded maxillas. So much so that if they were actual people, they wouldn't be focused on their evil schemes to take over the world or destroy beautiful people. They would be too focused on trying to breathe and eat and just function. There's a reason that those characters are drawn like that, and that is because an unhealthy face is an unattractive face. And in young people's storytelling, ugly people are associated with bad people. And ugly people have retracted maxillas. If you look at the good guys in Hollywood entertainment, and when they have to be angry or determined, they're actually able to have the turning point of their jaw one ear width approximately forward of their ear, and they're able to go like that and still have their lower teeth behind their upper teeth. So if you're able to do that, you're probably a good guy. Unfortunately, I'm not a good guy. Back in 1992, this chap here went in to see an orthodontist, and I was given the classic class 2 malocclusion diagnosis at the time, which was that basically my maxilla's too far forward. And the key identifiable problem was that I had impacted canines. So there wasn't enough space for the canines to come through, yet my maxilla was out here. So that should have immediately told the orthodontist I had a narrow maxilla. Unfortunately, what the orthodontist decided to do was to extract, to make space for these to come through and to pull this back. So, and the perversion of that logic is that I didn't have enough space, and yet the idea was to make less space. Now, in terms of projection, this was never the problem. The problem was this. This needed to come to here. But what happened instead was this came back here. Now this was actually being held back by this because this was too narrow. So I was holding this back like a doorstop, holding this from coming forward. And how do I know this was too narrow? Because I had impacted canines. So my orthodontist's thinking was pull this back to meet this. Now what my orthodontist didn't realize was that my teeth were attached to something called my face. And when you track a maxilla back, you track a whole face back. That has some very negative side effects. So you've probably noticed I've got a bit back, and I can talk to you about how I've achieved that later. First, I'm just going to cover what the pullback of my face did. You can see the teeth have been pulled back. It's flat from the eye down to the mouth. All that part of the face has become flat. I'll just quickly run through what my treatment was for wisdoms extracted. Molars moved back to where my wisdoms had been, and my bicuspids moved back. The canines pulled down with chains, incisors pulled back, elastics, brackets, retractive headgear, double strength wire, and a big band around here pulling my face back and down. So the results, a longer, flatter face, that to that. The eyes slightly rounder, less support, cheekbones are less noticeable, the nose appear longer, sphenoid bone that sits in behind the face, the nasolabial fold between the nose and the mouth, an outward angle to flat lines here, more visible because this was pushed in, more loose skin here and here, less hollow here, mouth smaller, chin pointier, less distance from the ear to the mouth, less horizontal chew space, maxilla comes down, the lower jaw as well, tongue tracking back onto the back of throat, jaw angle change, a rounder jaw, relatively square face to a rounder face, ramus on my neck, a shorter neck, backwards weighting, counterbalance that. But I had very, very, very straight teeth. My orthodontist was completely focused on teeth and bite and would do anything to the face to make sure that the teeth and bite lined up. The knowledge was based on a fundamental misunderstanding or lack of context, and the context was the face. We tend to think of models, for example, as sort of special individuals, and to a certain extent they are, certainly by modern standards. If a model were walking around on the hunter-gatherer plains, they wouldn't have stood out as anything particularly unusual on the dating scene back in the hunter-gatherer times, because they would have been just another face that can breathe and eat efficiently. So yeah, back then it really was survival of the fittest. So if my jaw was able to hinge forward into its fully relaxed position, which would be about there, but I can't achieve that because my maxilla is in the way, but compared to when I have to jam it back behind my teeth. So instead of the front of the jaw, you're looking more a bird's eye view from front on, but it appears to be a rounder jaw. Here's a demonstration of the squareness forward and the roundness back. It wants to be about there. Now if I could achieve that right now, my jaw would naturally square up. Jaw hinges forward. It's a positional thing. Be a little bit careful of, hey man, you want to get a good jaw, you gotta chew. It's not that their jaws are square. Their muscles of mastication are already out here, so it's easy to build it up. But if your jaw's back here, your muscles of mastication are back here as well, and it's very hard to make that square. That the face is holding the jaw back. I'm actually able to feel when the maxilla starts to track into a better growth position forward, everything comes forward with it. If you're back here and you're having to hold it back, what you realize when you come forward is just what relaxed feels like. I mean, I can't get this to hinge up into a fully just sitting position, but I can feel when this is hinged forward, just all the tension from here disappears. And you can see I've got some Ramus back shine at the moment, but if I go back to my position there, I've got no Ramus back shine. So in 1992, it was already too late. We were only ever treating the symptom rather than the cause, which was not a not completely grown face. What I needed at that point was some sort of expansion, and that would have helped. And then probably I would have still needed to get some chains to pull down the canines. What I really needed in 1992 was a time machine to go back to 1985. What I needed was expansion. At the time, after I'd had the treatment initially, I was doing a bit of television work, and I just knew that my teeth were too far back. And being a young 20-something-year-old, I wasn't really thinking about the function at that point. I was purely focused on the aesthetic, because you're like, oh my God, what's happened to my teeth? They've disappeared. I went and got a second opinion from an orthodontist. He actually admitted that my teeth had been moved too far back into my face. And so he gave me this rapid expander, and immediately, when I say immediately, I mean within a few weeks, I was looking better. My jaw, even, without touching my mandible, my jaw tracked back forward. And my teeth were apparent again. And people were saying, wow, those braces really worked, didn't they? No, they did not. I even got a little bit of a lisp, because as this had come forward comparatively more. So I had a slight lisp when that happened, which just showed how much I'd been changed. I had the opposite of a lisp pre-treatment. Now, the trouble with rapid expanders is they're not a solution. They give you some immediate effect, but then the face falls back. So eventually the rapid expander broke and my face fell back. I was wondering if there was a permanent solution. And back in as early as 2002, I was doing this. And I didn't really know what I was doing. And I wasn't really doing it with any vigor or consistency. But I just sensed that if my face has been pulled back, maybe I can pull it myself. I probably wasn't applying enough force to get any noticeable change. Now, there's a lot of people who are doing face pulling now, and that's where you pull from the front and also from the back with some sort of tea towel or something. You bite down on it and you pull out. So the idea is to pull the maxilla out. There needs to be a lot more research into the potential dangers of doing that. But I can just tell you from my limited experience of doing that I can feel I feel more relaxed in my mid-face when I do that. But I think I'm an extreme case where I've been pulled back. I would caution anyone doing that. However, I would caution much more the damage of pulling a face back than pulling a face forward. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what was wrong. But then I saw a story, and it was 60 Minutes Australia, and that was a fella called John Mew, and he'd come up with the new, or Mew, practice called orthotropics. He was talking about all of the damage that orthodontics, including his early career, had done to faces, and the idea that restricting the growth of faces and extracting and pulling back smiles and mid-faces was damaging to faces. And he was the first guy I ever heard talk about the maxilla being important to facial function and aesthetics, being crucial. Everything comes from the maxilla. Everything else, it's a domino effect. So John Mew seemed to really articulate beautifully the problem that I'd been aware of without being able to clearly identify it and articulate it. But from an adult point of view, he didn't seem to offer the solution at that time. And that was because his treatment was very much focused on 6 to 9-year-olds when the face is developing, encourage growth, and then they reach their genetic potential. I figured after listening to John Mew, there wasn't really much I could do to permanently sort myself out, and I just had to kind of get on with it. So my face fell back. But then I came across a guy, Mike Mew, and I thought, is he related to John Mew? And he was talking a lot about what adults can do to actually get some facial growth. And he'd actually taken John Mew's findings and progressed it even further. He wasn't interested really in teeth. Straight teeth were a byproduct of having a good face, a well-grown face. And he'd invented this amazing device that could enable adults to get full facial growth. And I really wanted to get me one of them. And what I found out it was the tongue, and specifically the position of the tongue. And if you want to know about mewing, just look up any video, Google mewing or Mike Mew in particular. You'll very quickly fall down a rabbit hole of understanding the entire face. So what Mike and John Mew have been able to show consistently and persistently with face after face is that if you can get your tongue up on the roof of your mouth, and ideally all of the tongue, including the back 2/3, you will begin to achieve a better facial result. Your face will grow up and out. Now this is when you're at rest and you're not yabbering on doing a YouTube video. Over time, muscle, the tongue, massive muscle, beats bone. While this is a massive breakthrough, the average hunter-gatherer was clearly mewing as a matter of course. They weren't thinking about it, that was what they were doing, and that is what mewing is. It's correct facial posture. It's just something that we used to do that we aren't doing so much now. For a variety of reasons, as a species, we aren't growing as well as we used to. And I'll speculate on why that may be, but in a way that's irrelevant. What we want to do is try and get a solution for you. So what if you're someone who doesn't have great facial growth to start with? It's going to be a lot more difficult to mew. You imagine if your maxilla is back here and you're trying to get your tongue up on the roof of your mouth, you don't have enough space. Or if your jaw's held back here, it's difficult. And the other issue is that if you have a restricted growth, it's likely that you're going to have a high arch. So if we look from front on, it's going to be like that, as opposed to a muzzle sort of out here. And you can imagine trying to get your tongue up on a muzzle is much easier than trying to get it onto a high arch. So muzzle out here, high arch, back and down. And you can just picture how much easier it is to get a tongue up on a roomy flat space than it is on a narrow high space. So what do you do if you can't mew effectively because of the physics of your face? Well, you probably need some help and you need to get some expansion to get yourself in a position to be able to mew. I'm not talking about the rapid expander. I'm talking about a slow expander that allows a little incremental piece of expansion and then growth of bone, and then more expansion and then growth. I'm not going to recommend a particular model. I think the main consideration is you want something that isn't using an opposite counteractive force. You want something that's purely expanding. Now that's to get into a position to be able to mew, and then once you can, it's all about facial posture, and slowly but surely you will come up. Now I've certainly got some forward growth since this guy. And one of the key things that you'll see, whether you believe I've got some of that back or not, is that clearly I've got a gap here. And now I used to have that gap when I was a child, and you can see that here. And what I needed, and the reason I had that gap, was because my canines hadn't come down to close the gap. They were impacted. It would also close up that gap if the canines came through in the correct position. And when I had the orthodontic treatment, the canines were brought back in a backwards position. But to be honest, I'm not too worried about my teeth now. I just want to get some growth back. Mike and John Mew, their message has been consistent and persistent for years. The idea of growth is self-evident, and it's in the faces that they treat. What they're doing isn't easy. It's a lot more difficult, and it takes a lot longer to grow a face than it does to lengthen a face and straighten teeth. Orthodontics has come a long way since the dark ages of the 1990s, but there are still practitioners who are lengthening faces and straightening teeth. And I know just how damaging that is, and there's nothing more scary than the thought of one of my kids getting the treatment that I had. If I can stop any single kid getting their face ruined, and that's a very emotive word, but getting their face ruined from extraction and retraction treatment, then this video will have been worth it. Now what's interesting when you see Mike and John talk, and they don't talk about this themselves, but look at their faces. Which one of these guys do you think has had orthotropic growth? And which one do you think has had extraction? Everything about these two guys could not be more different in terms of their facial growth. But they're a perfect advertisement for good treatment and bad treatment. And I know John, he said it himself, his own father, who was an orthodontist, treated him. But luckily he was able to treat his son very differently. I am quite jealous of the kind of Insta generation, which is probably a really uncool way of saying young people now. You've grown up in a more enlightened age. I think it's interesting, and I think the whole way that we approach human growth of the face and the importance we put on it will change, and just the growing up conversation we'll have about it. Now, if we were still hunter-gatherers, life would be much worse. No access to amazing technology, no convenient food, shorter life. However, one way that we are negatively impacted by the changing circumstance is that our faces haven't evolved, yet our lives have. More sedentary lifestyle. We can now eat soft food, highly processed carbohydrates. Our faces are designed to last until our teeth grind down. And in the past, we used to eat hard food. And that is why we had great facial development. Evolutionarily, it feels like we're only designed to live a much shorter life than we currently are living.
Stop!
So it's not that living longer is bad, it's great. I love it. We need to find a way to try and get that facial growth that we've lost the ability to have. This is a very emotive topic. When you talk about someone's face, there's kind of this human condition where, I don't know, I want to apply an emotional sort of story to the face. Somehow the face is me. But I really try to separate that and just look at the mechanics and the facial physics. Maybe there's something to be said for having ill-grown faces, just a certain way of thinking and sort of an empathy. I think if everyone had hunter eyes and alpha faces, maybe that wouldn't be the case. I think having ill-grown faces maybe makes people nicer people. People don't treat you as well immediately, and it's not intentional, it's just subconscious. You have to try harder to win them over. So while there's some positives perhaps from it, it does seem a really high price to pay. Thank you. If you like this video, please subscribe, and I'd love to hear from you as well, particularly if you've got any stories of your own experience.